I never truly envisioned myself recounting this particular chapter of my life, but as the years go by, I've realized that life has a persistent way of catching us completely off guard. My name is Elise. At 44 years old, I have spent a significant portion of my adult life as a single mother, dedicating every ounce of my energy to raising my son, Lenny, entirely on my own. Lenny is now 22, and for over 2 decades, the two of us have been an inseparable team, navigating the trials and tribulations of the world side by side. One particular evening, the air in our home felt unusually heavy. Lenny returned home looking more exhausted than I had ever seen him. He had been pushing himself to the limit, balancing long shifts at work with the grueling demands of his studies. Seeing the dark circles under his eyes, I insisted that he take a moment to rest. I suggested he lay down in my room where it was quiet. As he did, I caught a glimpse of his gaze. It was softer, more vulnerable than ever before, a confusing cocktail of safety and raw nervousness. He didn't utter a single word, but his eyes seemed to be searching mine, silently questioning if the world was still on its axis. I forced a smile, hoping to dilute the sudden, thick tension, but my attempt at normalcy only seemed to make the silence ring louder. Lenny's hand remained rested on my arm. It was warm, soft, and remarkably steady. I could feel his fingers shifting slightly, almost as if he were touching me absent-mindedly, yet the sensation was electric. It was such a minor thing, a simple touch from the boy I had raised, yet it awakened a dormant, confusing energy within me that I couldn't begin to rationalize. I focused on my breathing, trying to maintain a facade of calm so he wouldn't realize my heart was hammering against my ribs. I was paralyzed, caught in the gravity of this strange connection. I kept reciting a mantra in my head. This is just a mother comforting her son. That's all this is. But as we lay there under the same blanket, the boundary of that thought began to blur, and my mind spun with images and feelings that felt profoundly wrong, yet impossible to discard. The proximity was overwhelming. Lying so close to him, I felt a depth of closeness that I couldn't categorize. It was a swirling vortex of protective warmth and a terrifying, unexpected attraction that held me captive. Lenny, however, seemed blissfully, or perhaps intentionally, unaware of my internal war. He stayed right there beside me, his hand moving with a gentle rhythm to comfort me, as though this intimacy were the most natural law of the universe. His breathing eventually leveled out and his eyes fluttered shut, leading me to believe he had finally drifted off to sleep. Then, everything changed. His hand began a slow, deliberate journey down my arm. A violent shiver raced down my spine. Lenny's eyes snapped open, locking onto mine with an intensity that demanded an answer. His gaze was a silent inquiry. He was asking if I was okay with this, if I felt the same pull. In that moment of absolute honesty, I realized I did. He whispered my name, his voice cracking under the weight of the word. Every instinct I possessed told me to stop, to recall, to re-establish the distance that should have been there, but I found myself physically incapable of moving. The tension between us had transformed into a localized storm, brewing with a silent, ferocious energy. In that quiet room, the air was saturated with things we were too afraid to voice. He moved closer. My mind was a chaotic mess of morality and desire, but I couldn't find the strength to pull back. I was being torn apart by the collision of my identity as a mother and these foreign, surfacing emotions. As he bridged the gap between us, my breath hitched. Lenny's hand eventually came to rest on my shoulder, his fingers lingering with a visible hesitation. The rest of the world, the neighbors, the bills, our history, faded into a distant blur. All that existed was the heat of his presence and the thudding of a heart that I could almost hear through the silence. I closed my eyes, desperate to find my center. I told myself to break the spell. But then I felt his hand move again, tenderly brushing a stray lock of hair away from my forehead. It was an act of such pure, caring devotion that it made my heart ache with a pain I couldn't diagnose. I opened my eyes to find him watching me with a look of absolute trust and vulnerability. I could see every minute detail of his face, the curve of his mouth, the tiny freckles I had known since he was a toddler, and the way his eyes searched mine for a reflection of his own confusion. He was as lost as I was. Suddenly, the trance snapped. Lenny pulled back, a look of sudden embarrassment washing over his features. He let out a shaky, nervous laugh and began rubbing the back of his neck. The sudden return to reality hit me like a physical blow. I took a sharp, deep breath, trying to anchor myself against the tidal wave of emotions that threatened to drown me. I prayed he couldn't see the sheer turmoil written across my face. "Sorry, Mom," he said, his voice trembling with uncertainty. "I didn't mean to make things weird." He looked away, and I saw a dark flush color his cheeks. I wanted to reach out, to tell him it was fine, to say that this awkwardness changed nothing, but the words were stuck in my throat. I had never felt more uncomfortable in the presence of my own son. Instinctively, I reached out and squeezed his shoulder, a small gesture meant to bridge the gap. "It's okay, Lenny," I murmured, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. "It's just, we've been alone together for so long. We're used to only having each other, and now, things feel a bit strange." He nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face. But just as the atmosphere began to settle, the sharp, intrusive ring of the doorbell shattered the calm. I jumped up, feeling a wave of gratitude for the distraction. When I opened the door, our neighbor Mark was standing there, his familiar, friendly face a welcome sight. "Hi, Mark," I said, trying to smooth out my voice. "Hey Elise, I thought I'd check in," Mark said warmly. "It's getting cold, and I wanted to see if your heating was holding up." I invited him in, allowing the mundane comfort of his presence to act as a buffer. But as Mark checked the vents, I felt Lenny's eyes burning into us. From the corner of my eye, I saw Lenny standing in the hallway, his expression dark and unreadable. For a fleeting second, I saw what looked like pure, unadulterated jealousy in his eyes. It caught me completely off guard. Mark eventually left, offering a kind "call me if you need anything, Elise." As the door clicked shut, the tension in the house didn't just return, it intensified. Lenny was standing in the hall, arms crossed tightly over his chest, his posture defensive and cold. "You okay, Lenny?" I asked softly. "Yeah, I'm fine," he snapped, his voice barely audible. I just didn't expect Mark to show up. He didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked to his room, the soft click of his door feeling like a definitive, unfinished end to a conversation we hadn't even truly started. I stood there, staring at the wood of the door, overwhelmed by a cocktail of relief and profound loss. My mind replayed the evening over and over, the closeness on the bed, his reaction to Mark, and the simmering fire just beneath the surface. I retreated to my own room and sank onto the bed, my head in my hands. I knew this wasn't something we could bury. Eventually, there was a soft knock. Lenny stepped inside and sat beside me, his hands clasped tightly. "Mom," he began, his voice a ghost of a whisper. "I don't know what's going on with me. I'm sorry for making things weird." I reached out and took his hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "It's okay, Lenny. We're both a bit lost. When you've been a team for this long, the lines, they get complicated." He looked up, and for the first time, I saw the raw, unspoken desire and frustration in his eyes. It wasn't just confusion, it was something deep and powerful. "I don't know what to do with these feelings," he admitted, his voice cracking. I felt a surge of maternal instinct to hold him, but I also felt the dangerous pull of the woman within me. I stayed still, letting the silence do the work. Eventually, I spoke. Maybe we just need to step back, Lenny. We need to think about this seriously. It's okay to need space. He nodded slowly, and then, in a move that took me back to his childhood, he rested his head on my shoulder. But the tension remained, a silent, vibrating awareness of the shift in our world. I wrapped my arm around him, a protective, comforting embrace that felt both like home and like a brand new, undiscovered territory. Maybe we shouldn't rush, he whispered against my shoulder. Maybe we need time. You're right, I replied, my heart heavy but hopeful. We both need time to understand. As he finally got up and walked back to his room, I sat in the quiet, realizing that our bond, forged over 22 years of love, would be the only thing to guide us through this. The future was uncertain, and the path was complicated, but for the first time that night, I felt a quiet sense of hope.